It was May 5th, 2006. My husband and I had just come home from work on a Friday afternoon. Like so many families do on a Friday night, we were getting ready for the weekend. In our case, we were preparing for something special, our daughter's third birthday party, which was scheduled for the very next day with friends and family. The house had been busy, had that happy feeling. We were just preparing things, cleaning, putting decorations up, organizing food, just normal life. I remember standing in the kitchen and Brian had just taken the trash outside. A moment later, he came back into the house and he sat down on the couch. When I looked at him, I immediately noticed something was wrong. He was very pale, sweating, and I asked him, "Are you okay?" And then he felt lightheaded and his heart was racing. And he said something to me that just caught my attention right away. He said, "Take me to immediate care." So he left the house and drove there, still not really understanding what was happening. It felt like it might just be one of those strange health moments. It would pass. We would be fine. But the moment the staff checked his pulse, everything changed. They looked at us and calmly told us we needed to drive immediately across the street to the hospital emergency room. They said the ER would be waiting for us. Even then, we just still didn't realize how serious things were about to become. When we walked into the ER, the nurse at the front desk took Brian's pulse, and I'll never forget the look on her face. She stayed calm and professional, but her eyes told me everything. Something was terribly wrong. So they rushed us to the back and he began being hooked to machines, monitors. They were asking us questions. They were taking vital signs, and suddenly the room was filled with activity. His resting pulse was over 150. And within just a few hours after receiving fluids, that's when the scariest part came. He went into full-blown congestive heart failure right in front of me. I remember him grabbing my hand and saying, "Help me." And in that moment, the medical team rushed in. They told me not to worry. They began administering diuretics through his IV, and slowly his breathing improved and he was able to talk again. But soon after that moment, we were told that he was going to be transported to the nearest heart center that was about an hour and a half away for further evaluation. And that night, our lives changed forever. We never saw any of this coming. A special thank you to Often Insurance for sponsoring the Your Daily Dose podcast. Farming is unpredictable. Your insurance shouldn't be. With generations of agricultural experience, Often Crop Insurance helps farmers protect their crops, their operations, and their future with personalized coverage and trusted service. Visit ofteninsurance.com to learn more. Often Insurance, protecting farms for generations. Special thanks to Brian Daly, Realtor with Miller Grant & Company, for supporting the Your Daily Dose podcast. After living in Central Florida for 10 years, Brian has combined a background in construction with a passion for helping people find the right place to call home. Having recently gone through the buying and selling process himself, Brian understands how important the right guidance can be. If you're thinking about buying or selling, connect with Brian Daly today. Email him at brian.daly@millergrantandco.com or call 919-222-0893. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Your Daily Dose. This is our second episode, and I thank you so much for joining me. This episode is deeply personal. This is a tough one for me to get through. I want to share the story of how health literacy became an important part of my life and ultimately shaped the work I do today. For many people, the term health literacy sounds somewhat academic or technical. It sounds like something you might learn in a classroom or something healthcare professionals discuss in conferences and policy discussions. But for me, health literacy didn't begin as an academic concept. It began in a hospital room. It began during one of the most frightening and uncertain times in my entire life. My journey into health literacy began when my husband became seriously ill, and I suddenly found myself navigating a world that I knew very little about, the healthcare system. And like many caregivers, I didn't choose this role. It arrived unexpectedly, and I had to learn quickly how to manage medical information, make life-threatening decisions, communicate with doctors, and advocate for someone that I loved more than anyone in this world. So today I want to share that journey. I want to talk about what our life looked like before illness entered it and what happened when everything suddenly changed, and how those experiences eventually led me to become passionate about helping patients and caregivers better understand their health and how to navigate the healthcare system. I hope that by sharing my story, anyone who is currently in a caregiving role or navigating their own health challenges may feel a little less alone. Because the truth is, many families go through this experience, but often they go through them quietly. To understand how dramatically things change, it helps to first understand what our life looked like before my husband was diagnosed with heart failure. At that time, my husband and I had been married only 6 years. We were building our life together in the way many young families do. We had a beautiful daughter who was only 3, and she was just at that wonderful stage where every day was full of curiosity and fun, and she was just awesome. Our home was lively and busy. Anyone who has a 3-year-old knows that life revolves around their energy and their imagination and their sleep schedule. There were toys scattered around the house, bedtime stories to read, and this chaos that comes from raising a young child was just at the heart of what we were doing. I was a public school librarian. I truly loved it. I was surrounded by books and students, helping them discover books that they loved and information for reports. And, they've just always been spaces where people could go to learn and explore ideas. And I just found great joy in being there. My husband had a successful career as well. He worked for a wonderful company that valued him both as an employee and a person. And he was hardworking, dedicated, proud of the work he was doing. And at that time in our lives, he was the primary breadwinner for our family. Like many couples, we had plans for the future. We assumed we would continue to grow our careers, raise our daughter, build our life together over many years. We believed we had time, all the time in the world. And like most people, we didn't spend much time thinking about serious illness. Health was something we took for granted, as many people do when life feels stable and predictable. But life has a way of changing unexpectedly and overnight. When my husband was diagnosed with congestive cardiomyopathy, or unexplained heart failure, everything changed. For those who may not be familiar with that term, congestive cardiomyopathy is a form of heart failure in which the heart becomes weakened and can't pump off the blood effectively throughout the body. So, hearing that diagnosis for the first time was overwhelming. We didn't even really understand what it meant truly the night we were diagnosed. And when you receive news like that, it can feel as though the ground beneath you has shifted. Suddenly, you're faced with a new reality that you did not anticipate and certainly didn't plan for. One of the most immediate consequences for his diagnosis was that he could not return to work. That single change had enormous implications for our family. The person who had been providing financial stability was now dealing with a serious and unpredictable condition. In addition to the emotional impact, there also are practical concerns. How would we manage financially? We were a 2 income family. What would our future look like? How would we adjust our lives to accommodate this new reality? For many people, you don't think about these things happening. And for us, it took both of our incomes to pay for our 2 car payments, our mortgage, our bills, raising our daughter. And so overnight, we went to about a third of what we were bringing home. And we had to figure out what life looked like because of that. So, one of the things we did was we got older cars that we could pay for. We actually had to sell our dream home, or what we thought was our dream home at the time, and downsize, to a smaller home, to a more affordable mortgage that I could pay for by myself. And so these are all things that I could have never dreamt of or anticipated, but they became my new reality. There are questions that we had never imagined needing to answer so early in our lives together. Almost overnight, my role in the family changed. In addition to being a wife and a mother, I became a caregiver. And caregiving is something many people step into without any preparation. There's rarely a manual or a clear roadmap in how to care for someone with a chronic illness, and every patient's different. So suddenly I was responsible for helping manage my husband's medical care while still maintaining all of the other responsibilities in my life. They didn't go away. I was working full time. And I have to share this story. This question that I'm about to share was asked of me multiple times by multiple people. It'll really blow your it'll really blow your mind. I remember distinctly one Sunday morning, I was at church. I was standing out in the foyer, and someone came up to me, and it was early on Brian's illness, probably about a year into it. And they actually asked me why I was still working full time. And their next comment was that they believed I should stop working and stay home and take care of Brian. Well, it took all there was in me to not go off on this person, not be rude to this person, but I didn't. I smiled and I said, well, we like to have a place to live. We like to eat. We like to have heat and air conditioning. We like to have electricity and lights. And so to make that happen, someone has to work, and that someone is me. I also added that my work provided the health insurance that was needed in order for us to afford Brian's illness. And let me just say, even with health insurance, we couldn't afford Brian's illness. We had astronomical medical bills for many, many years. So it's just amazing to me people's mindsets when they're not in that situation. I would have loved to have quit work. I would have loved to have been with Brian. And let me add this too. Within that first year, I was a teacher in the public school system in North Carolina, and I had friends and family, co-workers, co-teachers actually give me some of their earned time off, and I was given over a month of paid days. So that's how I was able to be with him even in the hospital. But once we got home, I had to return to work. And on top of that, I was raising our young daughter, and I was managing our household. You know, the house still has to be cleaned, laundry still has to be done. I was helping my husband navigate this complex condition. So, caregiving is not just physical, but it's also emotionally draining. There are concerns for the health and safety of the person you love. There's the responsibility of helping them manage their medications, their appointments, and their symptoms. And there's the strain of living every day with this uncertainty. Honestly, the first, I would say, 4 to 5 years, every single day, I thought about life if Brian died and left me. And that's how I lived every day, scared that he was going to die. And so I get it when patients face those fears and when caregivers face those fears. When someone you love is seriously ill, the future can feel unpredictable, very uncertain. You find yourself worrying about what tomorrow might bring. So, as I began to adjust to this new role, I realized something very important. If I was going to help my husband Brian with his illness, I needed to understand it better. I needed to learn everything I could about heart failure. That meant learning about how the heart functions and what happens when it becomes weakened, as his was. It meant understanding the medications that were prescribed and how they worked in the body. And I'll take this moment to share a personal story just on medication. So early on in Brian's journey, he was taking somewhere between 10 and 12 medications a day, different medications a day. And so what I realized was that none of his doctors, all of his specialists, his primary, they weren't really communicating. I had to make sure that medications that were prescribed by each of these doctors didn't interact with the other medications. That became my job to manage that. So I had to become an expert on each of his drugs. And I won't ever forget, probably about a year into his illness, we were at the cardiologist. And from the time that Brian was diagnosed until about a year and a half later, he had gained about 80 pounds. And he had not changed his lifestyle any. And so every time we would go into the cardiologist, they would I felt like kind of fuss at him, make him feel bad about his weight, that he needed to lose weight. He needed to possibly have a weight loss surgery, things like that. And with his health condition, that could have been life or death. And I was totally opposed to that. And I remember leaving an appointment when he was so beaten down. And we got into the car, and I decided when I got home, I was going to put my research librarian skills to the test. And I looked up all 12 of his medications. And here's what I found that was so interesting: 8 out of the 12 caused weight gain. And here's what's even more interesting: they caused weight gain at the maximum dosage. And for most of these medications, Brian was taking 2 to 3 times more of the highest dosage you could take because they were trying to keep him alive. So he was on 8 different medications that caused weight gain, and they were putting him at a double or triple amount. So doubling and tripling the weight gain, and then making him feel bad for gaining the weight when it was the medications that they had put him on. So I did research and created a folder on every one of the drugs. I did everything I could to find out everything about this because I was tired of the person I love fighting for his life and being made to feel bad because he had gained weight. And this was by the people that were supposed to be keeping him alive and helping him. So I won't ever forget that appointment. We went into the cardiologist. We went every few weeks at that time. And I presented this folder to his cardiologist, and I looked at him and I said, I don't ever want you to ever say anything about his weight gain again. And he looked at me very puzzled and he said, what is that supposed to mean? He needs to lose weight. And I said, well, do you know who caused this weight gain? You did. You and the medications that you put him on caused this weight gain. And I get really upset, passionate about this. I know you can tell as I tell this story, because it's just wrong. It's not okay. And had I not done that, that conversation would have continued. And Brian may have wanted to have a surgery that could have killed him because his heart was not strong enough to undertake that kind of strain, to be, put under for a surgery that was not life-threatening, or was not to save his life, let me say. So what was so interesting is the very next appointment, about 2 weeks later, the cardiologist came in, he did his regular routine, and before he left, he looked at me and he said, Jessica, I want to thank you for doing the research you did, for being so diligent about Brian's health, and I want to apologize because you're absolutely right. We put him on the drugs that have caused this weight gain, and I won't ever say anything about his weight again. But let me just tell you, if I had not done what I did to research his medications, I don't really know what would have happened. And that's part of being a caregiver and an advocate for others, but for yourself as well. So it also meant learning about diagnostic tests, treatment options, and potential complications. And at first, this information was so overwhelming because medical language is incredibly complex. It's its own language. And so it was written in ways that were difficult for the average person to understand. And I found myself reading articles, asking questions, trying to piece together information from many different sources. But slowly over time, my understanding began to grow. And with that understanding came something very important: a sense of empowerment. Knowledge does not eliminate the illness, but it can reduce your fear and anxiety. So when you understand what's happening, good or bad, inside your body, you're better able to participate in making decisions and discussing treatment options. Another major challenge we faced was navigating the actual healthcare system itself, because medical care involves much more than just seeing a doctor. There are referrals to specialists. That happens a lot with chronic. There are diagnostic tests, hospital visits, medications, and then follow-up appointments. And then there's the insurance system. Don't even get me started. Insurance claims, approvals, billing, it's incredibly confusing. And many people find themselves spending hours trying to figure out the paperwork that's sent to them in the mail and what's covered, what's not covered, and how to resolve billing questions. I know for Brian, I remember the second time he was prescribed cardiac rehab. He had had a setback and he needed to go to cardiac rehab. The doctor prescribed it. We called it in. I remember the cardiac rehab office calling me and telling me that our claim had been denied and that we could not have cardiac rehab. I was livid. And I remember calling the doctor's office and they said, "This is an insurance thing. We've approved it. You've got to call them." And I remember calling, and through tears, I told the representative from the insurance company, how can this be with all the money that we pay for health insurance? And this is clearly something that he has to have. Why would you deny it? And they said, "Well, he's had this same treatment within the past year. And so we can't cover it twice." So I said, "Who can I talk to? What can I do?" And there was a process that you could go through where you had to write a letter, you had to show documentation, all these things, and they could then look at it a second time and make a decision. Every time I did that, I'm not telling you that this is going to happen for you each time. This was 20 years ago. But when I would argue the coverage, do what I was supposed to do, they would give us the coverage and they would do what he needed to do. So, for someone who's already dealing with illness, this additional complexity can be so horrible. During this period of our lives, we also moved to different states. And each move meant starting over with new doctors, new healthcare systems, new hospitals. So medical records had to be transferred. I had to be an expert on this, and new specialists had to be chosen. So I had to make sure that each provider understood our medical history, his current treatment, and these transitions reinforce the importance of me understanding and being organized as a caregiver. Living with chronic illness has emotional consequences for everybody involved. Patients face physical symptoms, uncertainty about their health, and changes to their daily lives. Life is not the same. Caregivers face their own emotional challenges. They often experience stress, fatigue, worry as they try to support a person they love, and often they're not taking care of their own personal health. A story that I'll share with you probably 3 years into Brian's illness and me being his caregiver, all of a sudden I remembered I need to go and have a checkup at the OBGYN. I haven't been there in probably a year. And in my mind, that's what I thought. So I remember so clearly calling and the receptionist answering, and she was just wonderful. And I told her who I was, and I said, "I need to come in for a checkup, to schedule a mammogram, to have my pap smear done." And she said, "Okay, great, Jessica." And I said, "I'm so sorry that it's been, so long since I've been." And she said, "Jessica, how long do you think it's been?" And I said, "Well, probably over a year." And she said, "It's actually been 3 years." And I realized that I had not been for my own appointments in 3 years. And that was OBGYN, that was my regular physician, that was my optometrist for my eyes, that was my dermatologist. I had not been for any healthcare in 3 years because I was taking care of Brian. And so it's one of those things where you have to be very vigilant and careful with your own health, because we see the decline in the health of caregivers over the years as they take care of others. In our case, I was also raising a young daughter, 3 years old, and parenting while managing chronic illness within the family, it adds just a whole nother layer of responsibility because she needed stability and reassurance and attention. Even when the adults around her were dealing with serious challenges, she was still a kid. And there were times when I felt like a single parent, especially in the early years after the diagnosis. So, balancing all of these responsibilities required a great deal of strength and resilience. Many of you, know that we live in Florida, and, one of the things that we love and enjoy are theme parks. And I love to tell the story of the very first time that my husband, myself, and my daughter all visited Disney World. So, this was 2 years into our journey. And Brian was not being given good news at the time. He was, just really living day by day. We were going to appointments every couple weeks, and his condition wasn't really changing or improving. And I remember having a conversation with him one night that Taylor wanted to go to Disney World, and I had never been. I wanted to go so terribly bad as well. And my husband looked at me and he said, "We need to go to Disney World. We need to take Taylor because I may never get to go with her again. And I want to have those memories and I want her to have that memory and those pictures and know that I did that with her." So then it became my responsibility to plan this trip. The first thing I did is a friend of ours referred us to this amazing travel agent. I went, sat down with her, we explained our situation, and she said, "Well, I can plan and help you with the whole trip," which was a lifesaver. And she said, "The great part about this is you don't have to pay me for my services. I have an agreement with Disney World, they pay me. And so you're not out of any money and I can help you." And that was such a blessing. But here's what I had to do. Here's where the work came in. I had to actually sit down, and everywhere between our town in North Carolina and Orlando, or Lake Buena Vista, where Disney actually is, kind of a little below Orlando. A lot of people don't know that. I had to get on MapQuest, that was back in the day, and I had to look for every emergency room, hospital, or immediate care between here and our home in North Carolina at the time. And that was if we had an issue on the road, we could stop and I would know the next place that we could stop for emergency care. The other piece of this was we had to drive because his condition was so serious they would not allow him to fly. And so we were looking at a 9 to 10 hour road trip with a 3-year-old. Well, no, at the time, we were looking at a 9 to 10 hour road trip with a 5-year-old. Our best friends that have been our rocks and our hearts from the very beginning, even before diagnosis, and they're still with us today, they had actually gotten a new Suburban. They let us drive it. They were crazy. I don't know why they did that, but they did. We took off on this trip, and I can remember being terrified, absolutely terrified, because of the thought of something happening when we were away. But we did it because I had the faith and the hope that we would be okay. I just did. And so we went, we had a fabulous time, never had to use medical help. The other thing I had to do, which this was also back in the day when you could call a theme park or a place and talk to people. I remember calling and I asked for someone to help me so that I could find out what medical attention was available within the Disney parks. I will never forget, I was transferred to one of the top people there at Disney World, their assistant, and she was fantastic. And I just think, again, that was completely a God thing that I was connected to her. And she talked to me on the phone for over 30 minutes. I told her our story that we were coming to Disney. And I said, "I need to know what happens if my husband has an issue and we're in the park." And she went over everything that would happen, that they had EMTs on staff and ready. They had their own triage situation. They could get us to the nearest hospital within minutes. And she just told me what to do and who to look for if we needed help. And again, we never needed that help, which was fantastic. But these were things that when a normal family plans a trip, they don't have to worry about. But these were things that I did have to worry about. And there's just that added level of fear, that added level of responsibility when chronic illness is involved. So, another aspect of this journey that is important to talk about is the impact illness can have on relationships. So, sometimes when families face serious health challenges, their social circles change. Some people don't know how to respond to illness, and we saw that. And many distance themselves simply because they feel uncomfortable or fearful. We saw that too. But at the same time, there were other people that stepped forward in ways that were incredibly meaningful. We were fortunate to have friends who remained supportive. They stayed present during the most difficult, horrible times. Friends like Susan and Van, they stood by us and provided encouragement, companionship, brought us food. Our family also provided tremendous support. Having people who cared about us and were willing to help made such an enormous difference. They would take care of our young daughter. They would give us a break, take her out to eat. She would spend the night with them sometimes. They would take care of her when we were in the hospital or had appointments. They would pick her up from preschool and school. They would drop her off. They would take her to McDonald's and for picnics. So their support meant everything. And our extended family also were tremendously supportive, getting us all together for dinners, calling us, sending us things. And even our church family was so supportive. I would look at our finances and I would think, okay, we have a $300 bill and we have $200 in the bank. I'm not sure how this is going to work, but I'm just going to trust and I know we're going to be okay. And I would go somewhere. I would be at church or I'd be at a function or I would be at a family get together and someone would almost always come up to me and hold my hand and in their hand. And I knew that there was money and they would close their hand and they would say, no one needs to know about this. So another source of strength for me during this time, I've talked about it off and on, but really was my faith, because my faith in God provided comfort during moments when my future felt uncertain. It reminded me that even in the midst of the most difficult situation, there could still be hope and meaning. And it really just sustained me. It kept me sane during moments when I was exhausted and worried. One of the most important lessons I learned during those years was the importance of advocacy. At first, I sometimes felt hesitant about asking questions or not understanding or requesting clarification. But over time, I realized that patients and caregivers must be active. They must advocate for themselves and ask questions. It means requesting clear explanations. It means making sure that treatment plans are understood by both sides. Patients and caregivers have the right. They have the right to be informed and involved in these decisions. So all of these experiences ultimately shaped the work I do today. Through our journey, and I say our, we saw firsthand how confusing and overwhelming the healthcare system is, and it is for patients and caregivers. And that realization inspired me to focus on health literacy. First, it was helping caregivers, then patients understand information that they need. Health literacy is about communication, it's about understanding, but mostly empowerment. Because when patients and caregivers understand medical information, they're better equipped to manage their health. They can make the decisions that they need to make. So looking back, my journey into health literacy began during one of the most horrible times in my life, but it also became a pathway towards helping others. And if you're a patient or you're a caregiver listening, or you know that may be in your future, I want you to know you're not alone. Your questions matter, your voice matters, and gaining knowledge about your health and making a powerful difference in your journey is what I want to do. I'm so glad I got to share my story. So until next time, take care of yourselves and take care of each other.